What do you think the difference is between someone who's had a really deep spiritual experience and someone who actually transformed from it? Like, what separates them?
Oh, what a question. What a question. I have this is completely off the cuff, but I always find myself saying this. It's where the rubber meets the road. It's action in everyday situations into life. A journalist asked me once, and they said to me, I know people that meditate and they're still dickheads. Why is that? And it caught me off guard. And I thought, it's because the true act of meditation is what we do with our eyes open through the day, not so much what we do in our practice.
You're listening to Mind Love with me, Melissa Monti.
I feel it's very easy to get seduced into looking outside of ourselves, to have spiritual moments, awakenings, shifts, big revelations, earth-shattering experiences. But ultimately, it's what we do with it in every single moment. It's how we come back to ourselves. And A Course in Miracles, which I haven't read, by the way, but I've had many people come on my podcast and speak about it. And I remember asking, well, what's a miracle? And the response was, it's a shift in perspective. So every moment we're governed by, I believe, three things. How we perceive reality. That perception is normally governed by our feelings and thoughts, equal to. And then from there, we make a choice, whether we choose consciously or unconsciously. And from there, we make an action. And that action is either conscious or unconscious. So our whole day is made up of these moments. But because we're driven and always seeking outside of ourselves, it's very easy to have the experiences, but then not embody them and live them in each moment. Because the key is mining for the wisdom when we go to the big database of source energy, the universe, or however we look at it, and ensuring then that we take that little bit of wisdom, marinate with it, integrate with it, and then allow that to inform us from a different perspective than just the mind. So if we're just coming from the mind constantly, we're very much in the world that is projected to us in any given moment, right? Everything is to-do list, everything is linear. We're always taught about setting goals and construction, having to get somewhere and be something. And we fall into the seduction of the material world. Even though I believe fully that we are, photons of light housed in a beautiful vehicle. This is the sacred body that's allowing us to experience life in any given moment. So as we start to take that, we can then access the deepest wisdom within us, which I believe is the heart. And if we start to nourish the heart and nourish the bodies like the sacred vehicles they are, then we can start to let the heart inform the mind and listen to the subtleties of that wisdom that's ever present. But we're so caught up in a stressed response of modern day living that we don't stop to pay attention and listen. So truly, all those experiences are to be lived in any given moment. And I think if we can really not get seduced even by the spiritual experience and the searching outside of ourselves, but allow that to be part of our journey that continues to inform us, because ultimately all we ever have is now. And I truly have come to the conclusion so far, and it might change over time, but if we're seeking outside of ourselves to resolve something within us, then that something within us hasn't been healed. And that something within us that hasn't been healed is actually informing our emotions and our thoughts and our perception in that given moment, thinking then the outside. So we're constructing the belief that that is the answer. And it's still outsourcing it to a degree, where I think we're living in a time in history, which I truly believe is that it's coming back to who we are, the I am, our own inner guru and nurturing that wisdom within us, so we don't need to look outside of ourselves because it's already here. And if we can, but sometimes, it's like the story that sometimes you have to travel the world many times to realize the home is where the heart is. And like when I left Wales, I traveled for many, many years seeking outside of myself. But ultimately, all those lessons constructed to realize it doesn't matter whether I'm in Wales, Australia, or whatever it is who am I being in this moment? And I think we just flip-flop into different areas of our lives that are keeping us distracted from that presence within.
That's really the story that I think has been misconstrued of the prodigal son. I see that story, the biblical story, as a return home, but realizing you never actually left. And that's what a lot of my spiritual journey has been, where it's like looking outside of myself. Maybe over here has it. Maybe this breath work. Maybe this retreat. Maybe this new book. Trying all of the things, wondering why some things were contradictory, some things line up. Okay, maybe the deepest truths is where all of this aligns, but ultimately, as you said, coming back to the heart. I've shared with my audience before, even my own understanding of the name of my podcast. When I started Mind Love, the idea was to give my mind love to train it. I thought it was going to be all about really training the mind to think differently than I did before. And I've seen my own journey of awakening, whereas I thought the first time was like, oh my God, here's my awakening. Here it is. But the whole thing has been all of these mini awakenings. And I feel like maybe that's the same for you, because you said, this is where I'm landing now, but it might change. And that's how I see it too. It's like that awakening was the door opening to a constant state of change, a constant state of surrendering these identities, these beliefs that I've picked up one at a time, because otherwise it'd be almost too overwhelming. But then I've realized that Mind Love isn't just about training the mind. It's actually about quieting the mind enough to allow the heart to lead, to allow that inner resonance, the part of you that connects with other things instead of just swirling inside of itself the entire time.
Exactly. And if there's one thing I believe, and this is from working in front of thousands of people as well as my own journey. So I'm not just pulling it from a book or a podcast. This is what I'm witnessing. And I believe an overactive, stimulated mind is a symptom of the nervous system, an overstimulated nervous system. And the nervous system is the filter between the body and the perception of reality. The nervous system is the messenger. And if the body is feeling a certain way, then it's going to continue to loop into the nervous system. That's going to continue to stimulate the mind. That's going to continue to make you feel locked in a certain paradigm of your life. So we can start to utilize with that knowing, once we can start to exercise the nervous system as well and free it up from its conditioned responses to how it's holding the body, because that's how it's identified itself to remain safe. And within that safety mechanism, there's an energetic holding that's been imprinted. You could call it a belief, you could call it anything really, but that trauma, that energetic that's locked, that is then informing the nervous system at a certain vibration, if you like. That is stimulating, and the mind is then feeding that, because there's a chemical loop response between the thought and the emotion, that our body is actually getting something from those patterns, even though consciously we want to change it or change that mind. So until we start to relinquish the mind and get into the wisdom of the body and what it's holding, and create an environment for that to start to shift, it can then slowly start to reorganize itself, which would then start to create a different information set to the nervous system and the mind can settle down. So quite often we constantly go in to try and just silence the mind. But if we actually get in there with an intentionality behind it, then those things start to relinquish its grasp. Does that make sense?
Totally. And it kind of mirrors what I see so often in the personal growth world. I don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the personal growth world, but I'm often surprised how many pockets of this world that I see people getting stuck. It's almost like the more work someone's done, the more fluent they get in describing all of their patterns. And they don't really see that fluency in naming all of these things isn't the same as freedom from them.
Absolutely. And I've been down that route as well. And the other thing that I feel, which I certainly went down, was that you're actually seduced by a materialistic lifestyle. We're actually giving credence to the fact that by making more money, by creating more achievements, is making me feel more significant in some way to my own self-worth, or something that might feel inadequate within myself that we don't even realize. There's like an inner child in there that probably needs to be nourished at some level. And we're constantly then externalizing everything. I've reached the top of certain pinnacles in that achievement with my last company, and it never took away the pain that was still there as a child. That was still there. The feelings that I held when I went to bed at night of deep sadness, loneliness, even though I had people around me, not understanding why do I always fit out and I can never fit in, were always with me. So they were basically that kind of self-help model, which there's a lot of benefits to it. I'm not knocking it, because it actually was used momentum to get me moving forward. But it never really got to the root. It never got to the wound. And I think, wow, but maybe my journey had to go through that to fully understand each step, so then I can look back with more wisdom than just going straight to the root, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I feel like I've gone through that same sort of trajectory. But I'm wondering, and this is something I've wondered for a long time, because it's so easy to look back at my path and be like, gosh, this part was a waste of time, or man, I stayed here way too long, or this part felt like a trap that I had to get out of. And I wonder now, was it, or was it a necessary stepping stone for the awareness that I needed to actually move through it?
I always look at that as everything as a necessary step. I do. That's the conclusion where I'm at, and that is the belief system or model that I've built for myself. But I look at the universe, and I look at nature, and I look at everything that within it and how it's orchestrated, and marvel at a sunrise and a sunset, and the tides coming in and the tides coming out, and the way birds and animals, like I live in, there's nature around me, it's beautiful, kangaroos hopping around everywhere. And you can't help but marvel at this divine orchestra that is just doing its thing without the construct of the mind. And then I think, well, we are part of that. And it is part of us. And if that is to be the case, surely there is so much more to what my mind, my tiny little mind, can conceive at any given one moment, especially when you start having different spiritual or mystical experiences that evoke a different thought pattern, because the amount of information, your perception of reality starts to widen, and then everything you think you know quickly becomes unknown. So you realize that you know less and less and less. So the point being is that it would be really egoic of me to think that there's not some great, when we start to pan out a bit, that there's not some great divine intervention that is happening through us and with us at any given time for maybe our higher purpose, for our greater good long term, even though we don't see it.
But you talk about nervous system as the real gatekeeper of whether transformation sticks, really. And so for people who have never heard that framing, what does the nervous system have to do with a spiritual experience?
There's a few ways of looking at this. So one, if we look at it from a spiritual experience for a moment, okay, and then we can break down the mechanics a little bit to my understanding of the nervous system a bit more. But I believe that the nervous system is a direct filter to, like a funnel to our consciousness. So if our brain is not emitting our consciousness, but a receiver to consciousness. So let's distinguish that first. I believe that we are outside of our body and the consciousness then is being housed within our body. And the brain and the nervous system becomes the receiver to that. But not only the receiver to that, every single cell in our body, the DNA, and I literally had Greg Braden on a couple of weeks ago talking to him about this, about the DNA itself being receptors to light and information. Okay? And those receptors, there's an adaptation to it. There's a learning, there's a sprouting. So ultimately, when we go into a love-based resonance, the DNA strands, if you can imagine the ladder to it, the helix, they expand and they open, and we can actually start to receive more information at any given moment, the divine self. And in fear, guilt, shame, lack, whatever those emotions are, they're not wrong, but if we're stuck in them constantly, then that DNA starts to collapse down on itself and we cut ourselves off from source. So the way I see it is that the nervous system is the direct conduit to every cell in the body as well. So within that relationship. And the nervous system should be oscillating between fight and flight and rest and repair. It kind of pivots. Think of it like a seesaw. It should be able to move naturally when at a normal state. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember, one of my guests, because I've had many guests on talk about different things as well, but I will never forget one saying about 150 years ago, the nervous system actually today receives more information than it did an entire lifetime 150 years ago, right? So that's what we're dealing with. And when you look at the evolution of the human body, we haven't changed much in the last 220,000 years. But yet we've got this technological advancement and spike that's happening at a rate that our body's not being able to keep up with. Okay? So then that oscillation is starting to get stuck into fight or flight. But because that's all we know, because that is become our familiar patterns, we don't really know much outside of that. And we think that becomes our new normal. And when that becomes our new normal, we start then creating like what we've spoke to at the beginning, with the choices, the actions, and the perceptions are all influencing that in any given moment. So then what we need to be doing is starting to, what I feel, is start to look at how we can then start to bring in techniques that work with the nervous system in our day-to-day environment, and then in contained environments as well. So, because I worked in the fitness industry for a long time, I used to work at the uni and here in Sydney. What I would say to people, people want to get exercise and they want to get fit, they would actually come to the gym, but they wouldn't change anything outside of their lifestyle. They wouldn't do anything. So they'd smash themselves on the treadmill. They'd be pumping weights, but then their nutrition would stay the same. Their poor sleep patterns, their work patterns, everything was then not supporting that aspect of ourselves. And then you create what's called an allostatic load. And an allostatic load is, think of different stresses in your life that are continually loading upon each other, that to the one point where things will start to break down. So an allostatic, for instance, could be you're not enjoying your job. Your boss is constantly on your throat, so it's creating a stress response. The neighbors next door that moved in are just partying. The dog doesn't stop barking. It's creating a stress response as well. Your brother-in-law or sister-in-law or family relative is giving you a hard time. And then these things are compounding, yeah? They're all compound. And then going to the gym and smashing yourself is another aspect that's actually not nurturing the nervous system. The things that you're doing in a day is not nurturing your nervous system. So we create more of a problem, even though we think we're doing something that's healthy for us. So it's when you start to pull that back, you need to start to unwind and look at all the aspects of your own life and start to develop an awareness to that relationship to the body and to how you're responding and how the nervous system is in any given moment. If you put somebody out in nature for a week, take their phone off them and just feed them and give them water and just let them be, they'd be a different human coming out of there, right? Because they're going to naturally harmonize back to the earth. They're going to start to get their circadian rhythms back. And the nervous system is going to start to be able to work with itself. And then what you can start to do then is look at, you got spiritual boot camp, which is what we do at retreats. And then you've got your incidental fitness per se, or spiritual fitness that you do on a daily basis. And then once you start to work with those two, what we found is then the nervous system will start to reorganize itself, the autonomic nervous system, which takes care of all the systems in your body. And once that can start to do that, cells can start to turn over correctly. Cells can start to heal correctly. They're not constantly in this fight or flight problem. Emotions, unresolved traumas can start to free themselves at a level that the body can cope with, providing you feel safe and held and you're not in that fight or flight constant reactive response. So all those things start to come together to support one on their growth.
I can see periods of time where I remember doing a lot of inner work, reading all the books, meditating, and I would meditate and I would feel completely at peace, and then I'd walk back into my life, and then I'd react the same way that I always had to something, and I would just get down on myself, like, what is wrong? And it took a while for me to realize it's not a willpower problem. There's something deeper going on there. And so that's what I meant even when I talk about these stepping stones of, could somebody have told me that earlier and I would have known, or did I have to feel it? I almost feel like I had to feel it because back then it's like being a cocky teenager. Like you still go through that age progression of your own growth. Another place I remember getting almost stuck is so many times in the self-development world, I heard, oh, well, you got to listen to your intuition. You got to go with your gut. What's the first thought that comes? Go with that. My understanding now is your first thought is most likely your programming. What real growth is actually being like, yeah, I hear that, but I'm not going to act on it. I'm going to center myself. I'm going to go back to the heart. And now I know my mind is always going to give me an answer, even if the answer is wrong. And so there's the other stuck point of like going back to self-reflection to figure out why I'm stuck, and then feeling like I'm spinning my wheels because that's just where my mind's at. And so when you think about all of these little kind of stuck points that people have, you talk about getting back to the nervous system. But what about the person that's there and they're like, okay, I recognize I keep getting stuck in this. Are you guys telling me that I'm going to have to go the long route, or is there a faster route to kind of accessing that nervous system and getting over the sort of cockiness of that initial growth journey?
Yeah, well, that's why we hold retreats. It really is. And what we found the sweet spot to be is 5 days. We've tried 7, we've tried 3, 4 as well. But once you start to create a container, once you pull away from all the distractions in your life, once you can be solely focused on with an intention, like awareness and intention, I believe are the keys to everything. Okay. And once you can start to develop your awareness with a clear intention of wanting to unearth those roots and start pulling at the weeds and following the line in to pull them out, then you can really start to move the needle. But you hear of people having spontaneous kundalini awakenings and this mass shift of energy. But my belief is that you really want to develop foundational practices to just allow it to evolve naturally over time, like a flower blossoming in its natural way, where you set up the environment and then it's going to naturally do its thing without forcing anything and pushing anything. Okay. So it's almost like you're bringing a flower, you're allowing a part of you to start to blossom in those 5 days, because all the elements and all the environment, the soil, everything is there. And then it takes a commitment and a declaration from oneself to say, I'm all in. And you're only going to do that if you feel safe. It's simple. And then once you're safe and you can surrender into it, because the body, when that energy wants to move, that the root of that's been contained, it could be ancestral, it could be yours, it could be past lives, it could be whatever label you want to give it. But when that wants to move, it literally goes through the body again. So the body has this moment of re-feeling that experience. And unless you feel safe, you're going to put your mind upon it. And once the mind goes upon it, you can quite easily shut it down in that, and not allowing that energy to express itself from its contained space into its expression of self, for it to move and expand. It's almost like the cork comes off, it moves, and you kind of like let it clear, you dust the rug off kind of thing. And it's been okay with what's there to allow that to dissipate. And then that aspect of itself is liberated and free. And then the body and the nervous system can reorganize itself and say, oh, I realize now that what I was holding on to is no longer serving me, and I can reorganize myself at a higher level, because that's what for us to evolve. Then that shifts our perception, and that shifts our understanding of what we think we know, and then we can continue to move forward. So to get to that, to fast track that, there's a commitment, a declaration, and I believe support most of the time is needed, unless you've walked the terrain many times, and then you can hold space for yourself. But when you're leaning into this, that's challenging. That's challenging.
I heard you say something about breaking connection into 4 parts: to the self, to others, to earth, and to source. And I know a lot of people in the spiritual world go straight to source. So I'm curious why you feel like that doesn't work.
Well, how can you connect to anything else if you're not connected to yourself?
Yeah.
It's that simple. Again, it's outside of ourselves. We keep going to source. But if you're not fully embracing and connecting to yourself, everything is a mirror. Source is a mirror. You can have a spiritual experience that can feel very, very dark and traumatic, and all it's doing is reflecting back what's within you that hasn't been healed. It's just a resonance and a vibration. Okay. So when you start to break that down, always start with the self, because otherwise we the moment we point our finger outside of ourselves, we're giving our power away.
Yeah.
It's that simple. And we live in a world that's constantly wanting to perpetuate a narrative so we can keep throwing rocks at us, at the external world, and pointing fingers and blame and division. And all it's doing is keeping us separate from ourselves. So when we talk about connection and we feel that connection is the key, then you start to reverse engineer that to, well, connection to self first. And that in itself, there's so much to explore there. What is the language? How do you talk to yourself? How do you see yourself? How do you hold yourself? How do you love yourself? When you're there on your own, what is that relationship like? Are you going to get to know your body more and more? Is your body wanting to communicate to you? You've been trying to get your attention for the last 10 years, but you're too busy and focused, caught up in 3D that you're not giving it the time it deserves. Or you putting your mind, letting your mind run and your ego on top of it, and you think you know it all. So already you're denying yourself a deeper depth to yourself. What happens if I start to get to know myself and give myself the time and space that it needs? Yes, we got to live in the world. Yes, we got jobs. I have 2 kids. Yeah, I run events. It's chaotic. I get it. But you've really got to start to learn the subtleties that are there within you and reconnect back to that. When I've been having a tough couple of weeks. Energy's been wanting to move violently within my body, and it's been coming up. And what I don't do is jump into that river and start drowning with those emotions. What I do is be with it and say, okay, this is happening to me in this moment. Like, you can name it with the feeling or the emotion, and I sit with it. I have a practice every morning. I get up 5 a.m. and I be with myself, and I go through my body and I start to develop that connection. Because then that leans into, once I start to really get it and understand it, I can be a better version to myself and a better version for others, because I'm doing the things that are required selfishly to make sure I can actually present myself fully to those that I love around me, and then those I serve in my community and friendships and so forth. If that's not met, then how can I develop that connection there? But what we tend to do is label things and isolate things and shut people down, say, I don't need people, I'm a loner, and so forth, because that's the way I've always been, but never really thinking there's something at the root of that we were so far back that we've forgotten. And that might be just becoming who we are, when actually it's not who we are at all. So without that willing and declaration, like I spoke about, and being open, we'll never get there. Because then once you start to develop those relationships, we see the world differently, and we connect to nature differently. We start to show up more. We want to spend more time in nature. We don't want to spend less time on our screens. There's a communion. There's as much to learn from being with nature if we pay attention to it and look at it and be with it, And of course, then that's going to blossom into something far greater that I see, that's orchestrating everything like we spoke about. So the way I see it is that we want to be nurturing all of them to allow us to harmoniously move forward. Because every time I'll say it again, every time we're pointing outside of ourselves for the answers, we're losing a part of ourselves in doing so. Yes, we need guidance. Yes, we need feedback. Yes, we need mirroring back. And I think that's where great coaching and great support and great role models come into play. So we get the wisdom. It's not just an intellectual idea, but the wisdom is embodied, right? And we definitely live in a culture that is drowning in information, but starving for wisdom. It's all going to come back to connection.
I know. I always joke about how much we lost, even with like Google Maps. Everyone suddenly became terrible at directions on their own. And then Google, we got used to Googling things. And now we have AI. How much of ourselves are we going to lose because it's so easy to reach outside of ourselves for that answer? And I think that's what I'm trying to consciously counteract. And a lot of my own work has been guiding me. Right now, I've been guided to really studying the divine feminine and what we lost when religion really co-opted the message of the great masters and made it all about the religious experience and following the institution and biblical literalism rather than symbolism. And the one that I've been studying this month the most has been Mary Magdalene. And she has, I learned that the 7 deadly sins as we know them were actually reframed from Mary Magdalene's 7 powers. And they were never something to be ashamed of and exiled, which is really what we do now. Like, oh, I'm lazy. Let's put that to the side. Well, even her foundation, the first deadly sin is supposed to be sloth, laziness. And so we now have a culture of people that feel like we're worthless if we're not doing something productive and not seeing the productivity in the rest. Well, Mary's sloth was actually originally darkness, but it wasn't darkness as an evil. It was darkness as in that liminal space before knowing. So it's the state, like being okay with the unknown, that pool we kind of need to wade in to feel our feelings, to reconnect to ourselves, to bring in awareness. And so it's been really, really profound actually studying this, because there's so many things that I knew and I even practiced, but there's something about this slight shift in how I see it where I knew, like, oh, I'm feeling this, like, just sit with it, feel the feelings. Where is it in my body? But it was more about how to get rid of it by letting it flow through my body. Now my approach is more around the lines of, how do I sit with this feeling of shame? Or how do I sit with this feeling of depression and give it love? Not to get rid of it, but to integrate it, to ask it questions, to see where it's coming from. And I think that shift has opened myself to a lot of my inner wisdom that I didn't realize that I was still pushing away because of the lens I was viewing it from.
Beautiful. How profound wisdom is that? I mean, that's it. It's okay. It's okay to sit in it and be with it. And I marvel at the body. Like, the bodies are amazing when you think about it, what it can do for us. Like, think of all the millions of processes it's doing under the surface right now as you and I just sit here and have this conversation. Like, words are flowing, vibrations of passing through. We're listening auditorily. I've got processes. My immune system is working at any given moment. All the functionings, the blood, the heart, the lungs, the breath. Like, we are amazing vehicles. And I keep that in mind when these feelings of emotions, like you speak of, and this moment of being okay to wade through the unknown. I like that, because a lot of my life is like that. And as we wade through that, and our body is expressing anxiety, and it's expressing maybe guilt or shame or whatever it might be, because ultimately, if it's expressing that, I see that now as feedback to a part of me that still needs looking at to be healed. But what about if we look at ourselves like you would like a loving child or an animal or a pet, and just be, you are so amazing, and you're giving me this gift that something's not right now within us. How can we co-create together here? How can we just be with each other? What do you need? Like a friend, what do you need? Not go straight to the meaning, the mind, the pain, the shutting down, the distractions, the myriad of things that are in our lives to keep us away from actually just connecting to that, like you say. And it's okay not to know. It's okay. The moment I took all the pressure off myself, when I moved into this field of work, everything changed. Everything. It's okay. All we need to be is ourselves. That's what everyone is craving. It's actually genuinely being authentic selves. Dropping the masks, being a bit vulnerable. There's a time and a place for things, I understand. But ultimately, if we can just be our truth, feel our truth, speak our truth, express what's really there for us, be heard, be held, actually having those spaces, then we always we need others to hold space for us, because there's nothing like if it's something that we can be held and vulnerable and share and just to listen, and that in itself is so healing. But there are times and moments where we just need to do that for ourselves, and we can. So in all that, really is, I feel, is the key to allowing us to move forward. But the challenge is that we've suppressed and held and bottled up things, because it's the way we've quite often, what cultures, our parents, our families, schooling systems, whatever it is, have shown us this is how it must be. And all that's changing. It really is. And I think what the world is craving right now is just genuine connections, genuine authenticity, and not even forcing that. You can see it on social media. People are forcing those things as well. And it's not near. It's just like, let's just be who we are, and yeah, it changes everything.
Yeah, it goes back to what you said about giving the body the right conditions consistently enough that it can keep upgrading. And I think so many people approach their own growth like, well, now I grew this, or now I'm done with this. And that's actually what keeps us stuck, because we're expecting it not to come around again and then getting down on ourselves when it does. I always teach people that growth is like driving up a mountain, kind of. There's so often that all of a sudden you're like, wait, I just saw this. I just seen this exact view, but you're winding up that mountain and now you're a little bit higher. You have a slightly higher perspective and you're ready for things there that weren't available from the lower perspective. And what are you going to do from there? Are you going to get down on yourself for being at that spot again? Are you going to realize, okay, there's something else in this for me. Let me sit with it and get curious enough to allow that wisdom to come through to see what I need in this moment. And I don't think we ever reach a time in our lives where we're not still growing. We're not still having these little hardships that, or sometimes really big hardships that push something through in us.
I mean, I'm a simple guy, and I like to simplify everything. And ultimately, we can be expanding or we can be contracting. We can be expanding into love and a paradigm there, or expanding or contracting into fear. And when we get into these spaces of, oh, I've dealt with that, like you mentioned just now, and I'm going to move on from that now, that's behind me, right? It's behind me, it's gone. Well, are you able to sit in that without there being an emotional charge to it at any given moment? Because if you can't, or if you don't, then it hasn't been dealt with. There is still more healing to be done there, and that's okay. But there's a direct, I think what we like to have as humans is everything sort of has to meet us on how we believe it should be going for us. And if it's outside of that, then that's not acceptable. And that's not the case at all. It's about being present and in the moment and being okay with whatever is and allowing yourself to move with that at any given time. And I love the quote, memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom, right? And that is when you really know you've truly healed something, that it can then move past it. But we get obviously traumatized by the feelings that maybe an event has come. So our coping mechanism leans into, I've dealt with it, I've healed it, and now I'm moving on, because we don't want to, we feel that we have to relive that moment. And I think as well, that's where getting to the root of it, and why I'm passionate about the retreat space, because there have been moments in my life. I remember doing a shamanic journey 4, a long time ago. I'm showing my age now, but I remember a stranger. His name was Rory, this guy, and I was in this shamanic journey, and I was terrified. And this guy I'd never met before was so kind. He was so compassionate, and all he did was hold space for me in that journey. And because of him, it allowed me to really start to get into things that I thought I'd dealt with and I'd moved on. But my outside world was still reflecting back at those wounds that hadn't been healed within me. And it was through kindness, and it was through compassion, and through being held in a space that was held correctly, that allowed me to liberate certain aspects of myself that were then healed. How did I know they're healed? Because then I just didn't have those triggers or reactional responses to them anymore. I didn't make them mean anything else in my life either. And that was like a really big aha moment for me. Then once I got that bit, that little bit was okay. So what else is there? I mean, you can look for weeds. You're always going to find them, right? You can dig. But there's a point, though, if we've left the garden unattended for so long, there needs to be, let's just get in there and start pulling this up, getting it all out. And then we get to a point where it's much more manageable and maintainable to get us through our day to day, But that's what came to me as you were sharing anyway.
What came to me was thinking about how so often, I don't know why, ADHD is trying to clean their rooms or something like that. The amount of times that I've been like, all right, I just need to clear out a couple old things from my closet. Oh, but this corner. Oh, but this. And then before I know it, everything's out of all my drawers and I didn't finish one thing. And I think that's how some people approach their growth. They just keep digging up graves. And it's like, you keep digging up the graveyard, you're going to find more bodies. What are you going to do with each one? Like, find something and work with it. Give it compassion, give it love. Find that place of nervous system balance, of healing. Maybe even bask in it for a while, bask in the peace, and then go to the next one, rather than destroying your whole house and wondering why now it feels so much messier than when you started.
Yeah, and quite often the destroying the whole house like that is actually keeping you distracted from the very thing that's trying to catch your attention. So, right.
Good point. You're like, I really only did need this one corner of the closet. But now I'm in the kitchen. Yeah. Well, I love leaving listeners with one thing to think about or do, some sort of challenge for the week to just bring this into their real lives. What would you leave them with?
Oh, well, we've spoken a lot about emotions today, haven't we? And the body and the nervous system. And why not check in with yourself? Maybe before every meal, or even when you sit on the toilet, or whatever, you get space and time to yourself for a moment, and actually just scan the body and start to tune into, how am I feeling right now? How am I actually being? And just get present. You can breathe through your heart for a few moments. That's what I always do. What I normally do is I'll put my fingers, or I'll breathe through my heart. I'll imagine breathing in the earth coming up through me into my heart, or breathing in the cosmos, just for like 30 seconds, center myself, and then I'll scan my body and say, what do you need? How are you feeling right now? Oh, I'm feeling anxious in there. I wonder, what is that? And I might even name it, put my hand to it, feel it. Isn't that interesting? Okay, let me be with that for a moment. Can I settle it down? And it loses grasp. And just from there alone, your relationship with yourself will slowly change. You can even put Post-it notes up where you spend most time. Just find ways to anchor you back into the present moment. Otherwise, you'll try it for a day or two, and then you just go back to the old ways, start complaining again, start going into the story. And actually, none of that serves us. If there's one thing I've learned, is no amount of complaining changes anything.
I think it does change. It just changes it for the worst. But and if you do decide to do that on the toilet, listeners, maybe before or after the pushing phase, because it'll be clear what you need. But for listeners that are really resonating with everything you've said today, where's the best place for them to connect?
The best place to connect would be my website, liveinflow.co. That's kind of our mothership. And I have a podcast as well, which I've been running for many, many years, called Let It In. So if they want to find out more about that as well.
Want to work through this week's Mind Love Challenge with others? The Mind Love Collective is a free community with monthly themed calls, weekly challenge accountability, and real support throughout the year. So join us at mindlove.com/join. Thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.